So if you're just joining, welcome to the second day of the Clean Energy on Mainland virtual workshop. We'll begin in just a few minutes.
Okay, this is Pat Dobson from Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory, and I'd like to welcome everyone to day 2 of the Clean Energy on Mainland's virtual workshop. I just want to go over a few details in terms of how we manage this through the Zoom webinar platform. Obviously, since you joined us, you've got the link to join the meeting. For posting questions, please use the Q&A function to post any questions or comments that can be addressed by the speakers and by the OCED representatives. The presentations that are going to be given today will be recorded, and the slides that are being shared will be made available to all meeting registrants on the OCED webpage. The panelists who are participating in each session should turn their camera on during their session so that the virtual audience can see you, and then please turn it off once your session is ended. And then one final thing, the moderators for each of the different sessions, please try to keep your session on time. So with that, we'll bring up today's agenda for the workshop program. So we're starting off with a few comments, and Sheila will kick us off in just a minute. The first session is going to be on community and economic development. It's going to be moderated by Shannon Anderson of the Powder River Basin Resource Council. We'll then have case studies on solar power projects in the former Appalachian coal land by Brad Krebs of the Nature Conservancy. We'll have a short break, and that will be followed by a panel on mining and reclamation moderated by Hannah Brunig of Lawrence Berkeley National Lab. We'll have a brief session on interconnection and power market, moderated by Chris Haas and brought to us by Tom Flynn of Puget Sound Energy. And then we'll have a final wrap up of the meeting and a synthesis. So really hope that you can stay with us for today's sessions, and turn it over to Sheila.
Great. Thank you so much, Pat, and welcome again to everyone. Thank you so much for joining us on day 2 of our virtual clean energy demonstrations on Mainland workshop. As Pat mentioned, we have another packed, amazing schedule with some great speakers and topic sessions for you today. As I mentioned yesterday, as we go through today's presentations, we will continue to hear examples of clean energy projects on Mainland, the challenges that were faced, solutions that were implemented, ranging from the economic to project-specific details. And like yesterday, we want to continue hearing from you and foster that discussion. So keep the great questions coming in the Q&A chat, and we will do our best to address them. But full warning, there are likely going to be questions that we can't answer yet at this time, but please keep them coming. We're at a very exciting time because we are still in the program design phase, and so we want to keep continuing hearing from you, hear about the feedback, hear about the challenges, solutions that will help, tools that will help make this, the projects and program a success. So to mention again, as Pat said, if you also missed any portion of the workshop or just want to watch it again on your free time, we will be distributing this out after the recording in the next hopefully week or so. So not to take up too much time, I know that was quick, but wanted to ask quickly if Jillian or Chris, my fellow project managers, have any quick comments before we hand it off to Shannon.
I'd just like to say welcome to, and really looking forward to hearing more great feedback like we had yesterday.
Yeah, I just wanted to welcome everyone. Thanks so much for being here. We know you're taking time out of your schedule to join. We really appreciate that. Again, just to echo what Sheila and Chris have said, we're in this really important phase of program development and program design right now, where we can engage with you and we're trying to take in as much information and as much of your feedback as possible so that we're designing the best program that we can. So again, keep the questions coming. If there were questions that you submitted kind of towards the end of the day yesterday and maybe didn't get an answer, feel free to drop those questions. And again, I am meticulously monitoring the questions, so we'll be sure to get back to you on that. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone, and we'll pass it off to Pat or Shannon.
Okay, so one additional thing, folks
Sure.
who posted questions yesterday, Jillian did a fantastic job of replying with a lot of answers, but as we mentioned, in some instances, these answers are still in the process of being formulated. And so in addition to the slides and recordings, we're planning on posting a frequently asked questions list that will hopefully answer some of the questions that people have asked regarding, what types of sites are eligible, what groups are eligible. These are all things that are being developed, and we really appreciate the feedback that the audience is providing, because that helps shape the direction of this program. So really look forward to getting more input from and comments from the workshop participants.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Pat. I think we can kick off the very first topic on community and economic development with our moderator, Shannon.
All right. Thank you so much, Sheila and the DOE team, for putting together this great workshop. I'm Shannon Anderson. I'm a staff attorney and organizer with the Powder River Basin Resource Council, which is a community group in Wyoming that works to promote responsible development of our mineral resources within the state. I live in my hometown of Sheridan, Wyoming, which is on the western edge of the Powder River Basin, which many of you know is the nation's largest coal field. We're excited to have a great panel for you this morning with good expertise from community groups, conservation perspectives, labor, tribal perspectives, and community economic development. So our topic is community and economic development perspectives. As you might gather, that's a very broad topic. And our panelists, I think, will each bring something unique and special to the conversation. We hope it to be interactive, so feel free, anytime to enter some questions into the Q&A, and we'll take them. We'll leave plenty of time for questions at the end of the conversation. So we'll go ahead and get started with introductions of our panelists. So we have to start off with Chris Markinson from the Blue-Green Alliance. And Chris, if you could just give everybody just a quick little introduction of yourself, your organization, and why what you're bringing here today to this conversation.
Good morning. Thank you, Shannon. Thank you, Department of Energy and Berkeley Lab, for having us here today. My name is Chris Markinson. I work for the Blue-Green Alliance. The Blue-Green Alliance is an organization that brings together the nation's largest labor unions and environmental organizations to think through policy and build coalitions that create and maintain, to focus on creating and maintaining quality jobs and building a clean and thriving and equitable economy. Our interest here today is really thinking about the challenge that is in front of us, and that in order to meet our nation's clean energy goals, we're recognizing and seeing that there are some challenges that are popping up, particularly on the how communities are realizing benefits to development of renewables or other clean energy resources in their communities, and recognizing that communities are beginning to deny permits for things if they're not seeing those actual benefits. So I'll talk a little bit about that today. So thanks, Shannon.
Great, thanks so much, Chris. And next we have Brian O'Donoghue from the DOE, the Office of Clean Energy Demonstrations, the new OCED part of the DOE. And Brian, yeah, if you could just give your a quick introduction of yourself and kind of your perspective for today's conversation.
Thank you, Shannon, and good morning, everybody. My name is Brian O'Donoghue from the Office of Clean Energy Demonstrations. My background, very briefly, I have several decades experience as a field archaeologist working in cultural resources across the United States, where I arrived in 2006 from Ireland. From about 2008 onwards, my focus at work was very tribal focused. So I worked a lot with tribes as we designed and developed projects in the energy field. And then in 2012, I started with DOE at Bonneville Power, where I began as a project archaeologist, but moved into their tribal affairs program, where I remain today with DOE. So I'm very excited to be here today. Now, why am I here? Well, mine lands by their nature tend to be located either on or adjacent to tribal lands, particularly here in the Western United States. And I'm speaking to you this morning from Denver in Colorado. So regardless of where the projects are located, we anticipate that we will be speaking and working with the tribes as we go through the process of consultation. And that brings them to the concept of what is consultation. Well, DOE has a tribal policy, which calls for any project that has the impact, that has the potential to impact Indian interests, which are the words used, must take these interests into account and consult with the tribes. And at OCED, we are very focused on doing full consultation. Now, consultation means a very specific thing under the law, but at OCED, we view the tribes as our partners and want to fully engage with them on these projects to ensure that their concerns and considerations are taken into account, and ideally even partner with them on many of these projects. And so that's why I'm here today to speak a bit about that. Thank you, Shannon.
Great, thank you so much, Brian. And next we have Jennifer Rauda from Navajo Power. And we're really excited to have Jennifer join us today to provide the perspective from her organization. So Jennifer, if you could just introduce yourself and your organization and give us a little bit of perspective of why you're here today.
Thank you very much, Shannon. Really appreciate the chance to be here. I'm with Navajo Power. Navajo Power is a private company, and we're a public benefit corporation. We've been around for about 5 years. We are majority Native owned. So our company includes folks like myself with 20 years of experience in siting and permitting large energy projects, and then several folks that have a lot of experience in tribal government, tribal leadership, socioeconomic development on tribal lands. And together we form a bridge to help tribes that are interested in developing renewables for their own communities to benefit their own governments with the chance to partner with a company that can help bring financing and other resources necessary to develop these large projects. My personal background is I started off as a geologist working with the Department of Interior's Office of Surface Mining, and then I soon moved to support developers across the country for large energy projects, from oil and gas to transmission to renewables and storage. And it's my pleasure to be here to share information from my company about how best to partner with tribes. The goal is to create projects that will be green and also provide substantial benefits to tribal communities. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Jennifer. We appreciate you being here today. And next we have my fellow Wyomingite, Brandy Harlow, who comes to us from the town of Wright, also in the Powder River Basin. So Brandy, yeah, if you could just introduce yourself, give us a little bit of background on the Wyoming Business Council and your perspective for why you're here today.
Sure. Thanks, Shannon. So I have a lengthy background in economic development. I've worked both at the local economic development side. I've worked for municipalities doing economic development and community development. And now I work for the Wyoming Business Council, which is the state's economic development agency. We have the state of Wyoming split into 6 regions. So we have regional directors across the state that actually work for the state, but help locals put together their projects and make them the strongest projects that they can. So I'm the Northeast Regional Director. I am in the center of the Powder River Basin, as Shannon said. I live in Wright. Just to give you some perspective, there are 12 operating coal mines in Campbell County. So this is kind of our livelihood, or it is our livelihood. And so we're excited to be on this panel today. I appreciate the opportunity. So the Business Council is in charge of setting the state's economic development strategy. We do that with 3 levers: leading economic development, leading economic growth, building resilient communities, which is exactly what we're talking about today, and then creating those opportunities to thrive, which is obviously what we're doing. Why is this important? I think most of you know, but Wyoming is an energy producer, energy exporter. We've been the top producing coal state since 1986. And then more importantly, at the local level, there's 5,000 jobs in coal mining in Wyoming. That doesn't sound like a ton, but there's only just over 500,000 people in Wyoming. So it's a lot of jobs. Our economy directly depends on it. Those jobs, that wage average is about $92,000 a year, which is double what the state's average income is of $51,000. So super important topic to Wyoming. And then on the Business Council side of things, as we work towards bringing large industrial manufacturers into the state and creating diversity and different jobs, we're seeing huge demands for more renewable energy. So this is a really important topic to Wyoming on how we can partner and make these things happen. Thanks.
Great. Thank you so much, Brandy. We really appreciate you being here today. And next but not least, we have Chelsea Barnes from Appalachian Voices, a colleague of mine on the East Coast. So Chelsea, if you could just introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about Appalachian Voices and why you're here today.
Sure. Thanks so much for having me. It's really great to be on this panel with you all. I'm Chelsea Barnes. I'm the Legislative Director for Appalachian Voices. I'm based in our Norton, Virginia office, which is in the coalfield region of Virginia. My background is in clean energy policy development, but now the last few years I've been working on coal reclamation with Appalachian Voices. Our organization has worked on coal reclamation issues for 25 years and ensuring reclamation and fighting for funding to ensure reclamation, in particular on abandoned coal mines. And we started our new economy program 6 years ago to work on solutions in the region. You know, as coal is declining, we're fighting to make sure that there are new sustainable jobs in the region. So our 2 major focus areas in that new economy space is one, continuing the push for reclamation, but with a focus on jobs and innovative reuse of mine land. And then the other area is solar energy and helping to bring a solar industry into the region. As Brandy mentioned, like these are places where folks really have a lot of pride in being an energy producer, being an energy producing region. That heritage is really important to people in these regions. So we find a lot of people really like that idea of continuing to be an energy producer and helping to produce energy for the nation. So this area of clean energy on mine lands is a nice little crossover of those 2 focus areas that we have. Our organization has helped to secure federal funding for building the first solar energy project on mine land in Virginia, which has started construction this year. So we're very excited about that. And we have a lot of lessons learned and experience from working on that project and helping to see it to construction. But we also are mindful that energy projects of all kinds have impacts on the local communities. So our work also includes helping to ensure that we're protecting these environmental justice communities and helping them deal with the impacts of potentially harmful impacts of energy production on mine sites, and ensuring that folks feel bought into projects and not further taken advantage of. So I'll just stop there. Thanks.
Okay, great. Thanks so much, Chelsea. We really appreciate you taking your time to be here today. So we'll have a little Q&A with the panelists, and then we'll get into audience questions after that. So my first question is for Chris, and that's, what mechanisms can project developers or government partners put in place to ensure jobs created are in fact family-sustaining jobs? And can you give us an example of successful job creation models from any previous transition projects? And I'm particularly interested in how rural communities where mines are located and how they can best avoid boom-bust pitfalls of job creation and economic development. We heard from Brandy and others that, coal jobs are typically good jobs in a community. They're multi-generation, they're often high paying. So how can we kind of sustain that going into the future with kind of a clean energy transition on these mine lands? Thanks.
Wow, thanks, Shannon. A three-part question. I'll do my best, and remind me if I miss something here. The first part of your question is ways that project developers or government partners can ensure family-sustaining jobs are achieved. Well, I think there's two parts to that, and I think the first piece is that in the short term, in the construction of or creation of the project that's going to be implemented, there are a couple of mechanisms that we see as ways to ensure that the jobs that are created in the construction industry are good quality jobs. And so one of those is leveraging something called a project labor agreement or a community benefit agreement, which is basically a contract between developers and labor that is negotiated, and it's negotiated in a way that wages, benefits, et cetera, are contemplated in that contract, as well as ensuring that projects are developed on time and on budget. That's a really key mechanism that we see folks being able to use in those arenas. But also utilizing registered apprenticeships, registered apprentices on projects is a way to build the future workforce in communities for things in the construction trades. Also using domestically produced materials and produced by high road manufacturers extend the benefits across the full supply chain. But long term, it's a different question. We're really thinking about career-long, high-quality job creation, including wages and benefits, pathways to retirement for workers, and ensuring that employers are thinking about or signing union neutrality agreements to reinforce the ability for workers to collectively bargain, et cetera. And like Brandy mentioned, that the coal jobs in Wyoming are high wage, and they are a career long. Many of them are union jobs, and that union presence actually drives that wage up, it drives the benefits up, and has a positive negotiation with employers. So I think one of the things that it's interesting on mine lands in particular is that they present interesting opportunities for clean baseload power generation, which is the topic today. And so things like geothermal or hydrogen or storage might be uniquely positioned to be on mine lands, because siting may be simplified, maybe a mechanism where the various parts and pieces to those kinds of technologies could be easier to implement than in other places. But also that mine sites have existing rights of way, they have rail access, they have existing transmission a lot of times that potentially cause those projects to be better sited. So I think job quality mechanisms and policy that reinforces that job quality is really critical for both short-term and long-term job creation. Your second question, Shannon, was really about successful models that we see in a variety of places. Again, I'm going to say this is sort of depends. It depends on your perspective. It depends if you and also how far in the future you're looking, and how long ago the transition actually happened. And so we hear again and again from workers that the best transition for them that is one that doesn't actually happen. And so Colorado, an example of that, I think in Colorado, that Colorado was attempting to think that through is through passage of a bill in 2021. It was House Bill 21-1324. It allowed utilities to invest additional funding in newer technologies and have a less of a cost-based analysis in that. I think that's an interesting mechanism to think about how we can replace jobs that might be lost in a power plant, for example, and investing in those. And there are a number of transitions on the coal power plant and coal mine sites that I think we can take a look at. Short term, you know, was personally involved in the transition of the Comanche Power Station in Pueblo here in Colorado. But there are some other longer ago transitions. I think the Mitchell Power Station in Pennsylvania has a lot of things that we can learn from. I think both of those examples are ones where the key components were that the transitions were really locally driven. And that's really fundamentally important for transitions in total, is that the communities need to be driving that change and setting out a path for what the future post-transition looks like. I think there are multiple examples in Appalachia of coal closures where communities and regions have benefited from the Power Plus program, et cetera. And I think Chelsea could probably speak better to some of those. But also, you know, Navajo Station in Arizona, Four Corners, New Mexico, all have a lot of things that I think we can learn from as great examples. But ultimately, I think transitions that result in achieving community goals, successfully supporting workers through the transition, allowing people to stay in their communities and support their families, improve the environmental condition and the quality of life for everyone in the community, in communities and regions, and retaining or expanding the local tax base, and that result in a durable and resilient economy long term would be metrics of success in my mind. Shannon, your third question was about rural communities where mines might be located and how to avoid the boom bust issue. Well, you know, economic development folks really focus on, and Brandy can reinforce this, primary jobs, creating jobs in communities that are bringing revenue into the local economy from other places. And that primary job is a thing that is really fundamentally important to local economic health. But I'll suggest that job quality is actually very critical to that. And that, you know, career-long jobs that offer again, family-sustaining wages, healthcare, retirement benefits, or so forth, are really important to doing that. I would say that seasonal jobs, like tourism type kinds of jobs, are good additions to allowing economic diversification to happen. However, there's a seasonality to them, and they're not career-long jobs necessarily. They can be, you have to do something else in the winter or the summer, depending upon what the tourism industry is. So I think a combination of of diversified industry across the board that really contemplates the full scope of when jobs are actually working, et cetera, is important. I think I covered it, Shannon. Thank you.
Yeah, I think you did. Thanks so much, Chris. That was a lot of great information. And just as a reminder, I know that there's been a couple of messages in the chat, but if you do have questions for the panelists, feel free to put them in the Q&A, and we'll get to them after the initial round robin. So our next question is for Brian. And the question is, what would you say would be best practices for tribal involvement in consultation for any projects that the DOE ends up funding through this program?
Thanks, Shannon. So as I mentioned in my introduction, DOE has a tribal policy in place. It's called Order 144.1. And it calls on DOE programs and offices to take into account any implications its actions have for tribal interests. And interests is sort of a wide-ranging concept. It could talk about treaty rights, usual and accustomed areas, ceded lands, areas of traditional, spiritual, or cultural importance, and so on. And so every time DOE makes a decision, and in this case, in the case of OCED, funds a program or a project, that has the potential to impact these, we need to stop and look and consult with the tribes affected and take their considerations into account and shape our programs in a way that we can either avoid any adverse harm or work with the tribes to mitigate them if they can't be fully avoided. But here at OCED, we're looking at consultation in a very holistic way, where we are not just ticking a box and looking at Order 144.1, and staying in touch with the letter of the law. We're hoping to develop meaningful relationships across Indian country with all the tribes that our projects touch on. We understand, and we've learned through experience across DOE, that these projects benefit from traditional ecological knowledge. They benefit from tribal input, and ultimately we'd like the tribes to benefit from these projects, so that these communities that have historically been overlooked in terms of economic development, or who have seen a lot of the adverse impacts of energy development and very few of the rewards or benefits, we'd like to turn that around and address that historic inequality. You heard Catherine Clark, my colleague, speak yesterday about the Justice 40 initiative and how it's deeply ingrained at OCED and what we do. And this spills over very much into the work that we're going to be doing with the tribes. So essentially that is a very kind of high altitude overview of our approach. But then in terms of my job at OCED is to ensure that all of our provisions, including mine lands, takes these into account, and that when we have a project that is presented to us, the first thing we will do is contact and engage with the local tribes. Now, consultation has a particularly legal meaning when we use it as in the federal world, and that generally refers to government consultation. But at OCED, we also understand that you don't get to good government-to-government consultation without first having these discussions at a community level, at a technical level, and building these relationships with the tribes, so that by the time you get to government consultation, it's meaningful, and both parties, the DOE and the tribe involved, have a clear understanding of each other's stance and the benefits and potential risks of any project that's going to be located either on or adjacent to the tribal lands. So that's, again, what OCED means when we talk about tribal involvement, is bringing the tribe in from the very beginning and engaging with them. And when I say the tribe, it could be the multiple tribes for each project, engaging with each tribe from the very beginning, so that the tribal input is received at the design level and carried throughout the life of the project, right up to turning the switch on and getting power from that facility. But also beyond that, because DOE has a tribal trust responsibility that's been established under law, under Supreme Court decisions. That means that long after the project is built, we need to make sure that the local community continues to benefit and hasn't been saddled with something that has a particular lifespan, and then it's done, and the tribe are left, carrying the consequences of that project. So that essentially is OCED's approach. We have an historic relationship with the tribes that exists before these projects and will exist long after these projects have been built, and we need to be cognizant of that and ensure that our relationship with the tribes respects that.
Great. Thank you so much, Brian. We really appreciate that perspective and commitment. Next up, we have a question for Jennifer. I'm excited to hear your answer to this. What unique drivers and barriers exist for clean energy development on tribal mine land?
Thank you. Very much happy to be here this morning. I think we'll talk about the barriers first, and so we can end on a positive note. The barriers are actually probably more extreme than most people realize. I'm going to give an example of one barrier that people may not be aware that exists. For 43 years, there was a ban on any development whatsoever in the Cameron area of the Navajo reservation. 1.5 million acres were actually restricted from any sort of development. This means no road building, no repairing your house if there's a leak, no building new homes, no new water lines, no gas lines, anything. And so this is an area where the community has been restricted because of land disputes from doing any sort of community upkeep. And so this is the sort of area that really could benefit from investment now. And this location is one where Navajo Power has invested with the community from the ground up. We've started out meeting with sheep herders, local leaders to figure out if a project could make sense, where they might want it. And we're trying to bring investment dollars here to develop a large scale solar project. But with a complete ban on development, you can imagine there's been a lot of things that need some extra care. And it wasn't as though after the ban was listed in 2009 that a bunch of funding suddenly came to the community. So sometimes tribal lands have these barriers that people wouldn't be aware of that really have limited any development at all. In addition, there are concerns if you have a location that has mining on it, that there would be concerns about how to work with the tribal government if an outside developer isn't aware of or doesn't know how to work with the local government. And all tribes are different. So just because you'd work with a tribe in one location in the country, working with another one could be very different. And just trying to understand the structure and the laws working with that sovereign nation could be a barrier as well. And then further, sometimes reclamation activities are kind of partway through. In the Cameron area, they traditionally had uranium mining. So there are still mines there, and they're in process of being reclaimed now, but there could be concern about the status of that and risks associated with working on new energy development on mine land. So you can see that there are a variety of barriers that would potentially disincentivize a developer from wanting to come in and partner with the community to work on a project like this. But I can let you know that there are a lot of reasons why you should get involved, because if you can take an area that's already been mined and you can reclaim it, there's a lot of local benefits, including the jobs that Chris talked about, and also just the opportunity to put land back to beneficial use for a community, which is what we're hoping to see at Cameron. I think that that Navajo Power is seeing that there are ways to get around some of these barriers. For example, at Cameron, instead of just taking the entire area and saying, this is our project area, we very carefully worked with the tribal government and the local community to figure out kind of what areas within that study area really would make sense for solar. So some areas that were really valued by the local community for grazing, we've carved those out, and those are going to stay as grazing properties. Areas that are either in process or have historically been reclaimed as uranium mining, we just cut those out. So it's a little bit of a Swiss cheese, but those areas are not a risk to the project because they're not actually part of our project footprint at all. And we've made sure that we are not affecting access to any of those locations with our project design or our access roads. So by working as a team, both with the government agencies at Navajo, with EPA, with local community, we can actually spend a lot of time on the stakeholder engagement part, which is of course required by DOE and other agencies under NEPA and Section 106 that you do this sort of consultation and working with the community. But we're talking about a much longer process that really starts from the very conception of an idea when a tribal leader says, hey, we think that maybe energy development could be part of our future, all the way through construction of the project. And it's not just a couple of meetings, it's being present on the land with the community all the time. And so I think that that's something maybe developers may not realize, that the level of commitment really is necessary. But if you can do that, then tribal communities can be exceptional partners for these projects. And one thing that we're seeing now is a shift where tribal communities, tribal governments can actually become part owners of these assets. And one thing Navajo Power makes clear is that for every project we develop with our tribal partners, the tribal community, tribal government has a chance to own up to 49% of the project. And this is not something that traditionally has been offered to the tribal communities. And it's really important to have this piece there. And that means that there'd be a true partnership from the beginning and have long-term revenue generated from the project, not just lease money, but long-term ownership revenue, in addition to the other benefits we'd like to bring, including jobs, encouraging local and tribal owned businesses to participate in the projects, and just long-term participation in the project itself. So those are some of the kind of things I think that I'd love to chat with you more if there are questions from the audience about these things, about both the barriers and overcoming them and how we've done that, and also the real opportunities that are present for partnering with tribes. I'd love to talk more about that. And another area that people may not realize is actually a benefit of partnering with tribal communities is that some tribes are what's called Hearth Act certified, which means they now have the ability to manage their own environmental permitting. And as anyone knows, trying to permit projects on Forest Service or BLM land, it can be a very long process, multi-year NEPA review for an EIS, On tribal lands, if the tribe is in charge of the project and the project is entirely on tribal lands, then Hearth Act certification means you can go through a customized environmental review process at that tribe, which means the tribe can choose to streamline that process for you and help you get through it faster. So there actually may be permitting advantages to working with tribal partners that you may not have been aware of. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much, Jennifer. That was very interesting, and I'm sure folks will have some questions for you later on. So next up, we have a question for Brandy, and that's, what do you see as the role of local community economic development agencies like yours in ensuring project success from programs like DOE is trying to do here? And what factors are most important to consider when selecting a project for funding from a local economic development perspective? So what advice would you have for DOE, I guess, and what projects they end up choosing? Thanks.
Thanks, Shannon. There's a lot to that question too. So if I get sidetracked, please bring me back. But role of economic development, as you've already heard from Brian and Jennifer, it's really about bringing the stakeholders together, not just at tribes, but just all of the stakeholders. So I think that's the most important piece. And then, ensuring that there is planning in place to make sure that it makes sense for the community. At the state level, we do a lot of helping the locals build capacity. We help with training, help them guide, identify what their target markets are, help them develop local strategies. And all of those things are super important to be able to be successful in the end. But really, I think the most important is that local level and making sure that they have everybody involved that needs to be involved from the beginning. One example of a successful project in our area is the